Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article is about justice in public discourse. What is this justice? What are the various interpretations of justice? How justice has to be adopted in the modern society is what this article all about. This becomes very important from your GS paper 4 perspective under the topic of ethics. Let's understand the meaning of justice. As the very name denotes, it is what is just and fair. It is about treating people equally and giving that very person his due in the society. So treating every person the same or how they would like to be treated is what is called as justice. So what each person is entitled, his share will have to be provided in the society is what is called as justice in simple of terms. So the foundations of justice can be traced to the notions of social stability, interdependence and equal dignity in the society. If one is not paid his dues as per the respect commanded in the individual, this will ultimately result in chaos in the society. When some of the society's members come to feel that they are not subjected to justice in the society, this will create social unrest, disturbance and strife in the society. So what is justice in simple terms? It is the treatment that which is dignified in nature, that which has to be accommodated to the individual is what is called as justice. In ancient India, justice was associated with the concept of dharma. So what is dharma? Dharma is what is just. Dharma is a social just order and this has to be a primary duty of the king. So every king, in case he has to constitute the very idea of dharma, he has to make sure that there is a virtuous conduct in the society. So this dharma which is practiced in the ancient Hindu system is the highest ideal of the human life. Aristotle makes a beautiful statement when it comes to justice. He says what is lawful and fair is justice. So fairness here is about equitable distribution. Justice is what is morally fair and right state of everything is what is called as justice, says Aristotle. So what we have to understand in this particular backdrop is the meaning of legal justice. Why? Because we are speaking about lawful incidents and that is the derivation of legal justice. So what is this legal justice? Let's say for example there are laws of the land. This will have to remain just, impartial and right to every single person irrespective of his class, irrespective of his caste, irrespective of his religion or irrespective of any biasness. So when we speak about legal justice, we have the laws of the land and that should treat every single person equally. Now comes the question, is law and justice equal and synonymous? The answer is a plain no. Why? Because law is a tool but justice is the end point. Let me give you a simple explanation with an example. Let's say there are two people involved in an incident. One is a rich person, the other is a poor person. So ideally, irrespective of who the person is, law should take its precedence and justice will have to be delivered whether he is rich or poor. Let's say there is a rich person who is on a high state, he is tipsy and ideally he should not be drinking and driving. But this rich person goes on the footpath, kills this poor person. So ideally what should happen? The poor person should be delivered the justice. But what does the court look for? The court looks for the evidence, and if the rich person destroys all the evidences, will justice be delivered to the people? No is the same answer. So what happens here? There is a tilt towards a rich person. So is justice delivered? No. So law is not synonymous with justice. So what the courts look for? The courts look for the application and enforcement of laws and evidence. In case the evidence is destroyed, legal justice cannot be permitted. Legal justice cannot be provided to a poor person is one such interpretation of legal justice. There can be other interpretations as well. Let's say for example, whenever there has been a heinous act of rape or murder, as we saw in Nirbhaya case, these perpetrators of crime were hanged to death as well. That is when justice was served to Nirbhaya. So we have pros and cons both in legal justice, and that means law and justice is not synonymous as per some example we just discussed. Now that we have understood the concept of legal justice, let's try and understand what is meant by a person's due. How much should a person get in the society? Is justice being delivered? That can be broken into two distinct parts. One is what is called as the hierarchical notion, the other is on the basis of egalitarian notion. So what is this each is due under the hierarchical notion? Under this particular hierarchical notion, let's say I am a person who is born in an upper caste, or let's say I am a person who is born in a particular community or in a particular religion or in a particular ethnic group as well. Just because I as a person am born in a particular caste, race, religion, so on and so forth, by birth I am given certain advantages. So if I am born in a particular hierarchy, I am entitled to much greater power, much greater wealth, much greater cultural status and knowledge, which might not be provided to another person from a different caste, different community, different religion, different language, or a different ethnic group. So just because I am born in a particular hierarchy, that is giving me all the entitlements which might not be given to another person who is born in a different caste, so on and so forth. Then comes the concept of egalitarian notion. Under hierarchy, everything was decided on the basis of my birth, but in this particular egalitarian notion, irrespective of the caste, irrespective of the class, irrespective of the color, creed, gender, nationality, I as a person will be treated equally. That is what is called as egalitarian notion. So when it comes to paying his dues in egalitarian society, everyone is treated equally, but when it comes to hierarchical notion, this is on the basis of birth and there is segregation, and entitlements is only restricted to certain people. So justice is delivered in the egalitarian notion and justice is not delivered in the hierarchical notion, is what this article says. This leads to another concept of what is called as social justice. So what is this social justice? We are all living in a society. So we might be born as Hindu, Muslim, Christian, so becomes a religion. Then we are born in a different caste, which is about caste. Then we are born as male and female, which is about gender, or it can be language, or it can be country as well. So let's say if I'm doing a particular work, irrespective of who is doing it, they have to be given equal salary. But let's say if I am segregated in the form of language, in the form of gender, in the form of religion, or in the form of caste, and am not paid equally, this is violating the concept of social justice. So what is social justice here? We are all living in the society, so irrespective of all these biases, when we are treated equally, that is the concept of social justice. So the concept of social justice treats every single person on an egalitarian basis. This is what Ambedkar beautifully says: a just society is that society in which ascending sense of reverence, that is respect, and descending sense of contempt is dissolved into the creation of a compassionate society. So what a beautiful soul Ambedkar is, and what beautiful words has he given when it comes to social justice. This comes to another concept of distributive justice. It refers to equitable allocation of assets in the society. Let's say, for example, there are some serious economic inequalities in the society. So the government will have to take certain steps in the society to redistribute some of the important resources of the society to provide a level playing field for everyone in the society. How do we understand this? That is the process of need-based principle as well as the principle of desert. What is this need-based principle? All of us have some basic amenities that we all require to sustain our lives. That is food, that is clothing, and also some shelter as well. So when this is not provided to a person, this means there is violation of justice under the distributive justice. So what the government will have to do is to provide all these basic amenities, that which is called as the need-based principle. The next principle is the principle of desert. What is this principle of desert? Let's say, for example, there can be a talented cricketer. All of them play cricket, but there are few individuals who are exceptionally talented. Let's take the example of Virat Kohli. When it comes to IPL auctioning, Virat Kohli might be paid high. Why? That is because of his hard work, that is because of his dedication and discipline, and it is because of his hard work he is paid paid more when it comes to the IPL. So what this principle of desert says, that there would be inequality in the society. Why? That is because there are few individuals who are working more harder than the other principle. So what is that we have to understand? In case there is a talented person where the start for all the cricketers or an individual is just the same, but because of his hard work, because of his dedication, he is gaining more. That is once again justice according to the principle of desert. So according to the author, in case distributive justice has to be delivered, there has to be a fine balance between the principle of desert and the need based principle. So who takes the responsibility? The responsibility is taken by the government of India, where they have to provide all the basic amenities as required to people, irrespective of their contribution to the nation making. So putting justice back into the public discourse should be our basic priority, or else the dreams of our nation will never turn into reality, says this particular article. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about threats posed by Islamic State as a terrorist organization to the global community. First, we have to understand the origins of Islamic State. Back in the year 2003, what we have is United States of America entering into Iraq, and this happens to be one of the invasions. So as they entered Iraq, they also destroyed the local economy. They also bring the government under threat as well. This is where they were waiting for certain people who wanted to take revenge on United States of America. One such person is Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi pledged allegiance to Osama bin Laden. Why? Because all these people wanted to take revenge on United States of America for destroying the whole atmosphere of Iraq. This is when they created what is called as Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So this Al-Qaeda in Iraq becomes a major force. But back in the year 2006, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi passes away. After he passes away, this gives rise to another organization called as the Islamic State in Iraq. So what is this Islamic State in Iraq? The Al-Qaeda in Iraq becomes another organization called as Islamic State in Iraq, which becomes an umbrella organization. So all the terrorists, individuals and multiple other organizations come under the single bracket of Islamic State in Iraq. So what is started as a revenge against United States of America wanted to establish the claim of Islamic State in Iraq. Then in the year 2010, this group was headed by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. This eventually went on to become Islamic State in Iraq and Levant. What started in Iraq started spreading its tentacles to Syria as well. Now the question is, how does this particular group, which started in Iraq, spread its wings in Iraq as well as Syria? That is because of the political standoff between the Shia-led government and the minority Sunni Arab community in both Iraq as well as in Syria. That is because of the political standoff. This gave rise to Islamic State in Iraq and Levant. This is how it all started, and as it started, they started spreading, they started conducting heinous activities, killing multiple people of different nationalities. That is when the global community got together. You have Russia also fighting ISIS, you also have the local government forces which is fighting ISIS, and this also required United States of America to also step up its process as well. So United States of America started a particular operation called as Operation Inherent Resolve. So what is this? This is United States of America's military operation where they wanted to make sure that this particular terrorist organization is neutralized. Then they had another operation called as Operation Kaila Mullah. So what is this? This resulted in death of its leader, that is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. So what happens after this? So all countries come together, they destroy the whole idea of ISIS is what everyone assumed, and its leader was also killed in this particular debacle, and people also assumed that ISIS is long dead. But that is not the reality. Why? That is because there are few ISIS fighters who have withdrawn from the frontline forces, but they are operating in the deserts, mountains, hinterlands of the conflict-ridden countries. According to the recent updates given by United Nations counter-terrorism chief, he says that there are more than 10,000 IS fighters who are fighting in different parts of different countries, and he makes a point that they are in West Asia and also in the African countries as well. Now the point to be understood is why is that they are in West Asia and why is that they are in Africa. That is because of political turmoil, chaos and instability in this particular region. When you go back to the original foundations, they were present in Iraq, they were also present in Syria. Why? Because there was no elected government. Even if there existed one, there was lot of turmoil in it, there was infighting, there was sectarian war. So when there is chaos in a region, that is when a terrorist outfit starts growing. Currently in West Asia and in Africa, there is lot of chaos and political instability. That is why ISIS is operating in this region. The author goes on to speak about three examples. He takes the example of Afghanistan, he takes the example of Iraq and Syria, and he also brings into picture Libya as well. In all these countries, what we actually witness is political turmoil. There are no consensus as to who is heading that particular government. There is also broad bifurcation and sectarian war in all these countries. This means that this gives an ideal platform for the Islamic State to come and operate as a terrorist organization. So what should be the way forward in order to bring an end to Islamic State? There are some regional governments as well as international backers. Who are these international backers? Let's say for example, it can be Russia, or it can be United States of America, or it can be China, who has a major control in Afghanistan. So all these international powers will have to come together, support the regional governments like Iraq, Syria, Libya, and they should provide all the forces and ammunitions so that Islamic State as an organization can be ultimately destroyed. So the idea to be understood going forward is that these international backers should be supporting the regional governments so that they can take forward the destruction of Islamic State, is what this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about manufacturing in China. There are a number of countries which had set its manufacturing bases in China. This includes countries like United States of America, South Korea and Japan. After the pandemic hit, all these countries are planning to shift their bases from China to other countries like India and Vietnam. In this particular discussion, what we are going to focus is some of the manufacturing deficiencies in India which India has to address in order to compete or bring these manufacturing centers from China to India. There are three major reasons why these countries are looking at alternative options. So what are these major issues? One is because of the concentration of all the industries in China. Let's say for example, the active pharmaceutical ingredients which is based in China. Let's say for example, with respect to the manufacturing of phones as well, when it comes to the rare earth metals, most of these manufacturing hubs are present in China. Let's say if there is a pandemic or any other issue, if this particular country is not able to supply all these manufacturing products, ultimately other countries are bound to suffer. So because the concentration of manufacturing countries from all these countries are consolidated in China, in case there is a pandemic or any other issue, there would not be exports of this manufacturing product. That's the first issue. The second issue is with respect to China's policy itself. Let's say for example, there are some critical issues and China all of a sudden decides that it does not want to export. Why? Because most of the concentration of manufacturing countries are present in China. So if it says that it is not exporting the active pharmaceutical ingredient which is very important for the health sector, other countries are bound to suffer as well. So some of the important Chinese dominants are present in essential industrial goods. So in case they say tomorrow that we are not going to send other countries are bound to suffer. The third important factor is also because of dominance and trade war between United States of America and China, and also geopolitical tensions between India and China, geopolitical tensions between Japan and China, and also some of the issues surfacing between China and South Korea. So the geopolitical tensions as well as trade war with their partner countries is what is making countries move from China to other countries. All these means that these countries are now looking for alternative bases. So what are the alternative bases? One such country in consideration happens to be India. So can India succeed is what we have to look at. Let's look at some of the important statistics as given under this article. When it comes to the world manufacturing output, China ranks first in the contribution, and the ranking for India is about sixth. When it comes to the GDP of the manufacturing sector, India currently contributes about 15% in 2018, and this happens to be half of China's figure. In fact, India is also planning to increase the share of this manufacturing in the gross domestic product to 25% by 2022. Then we also have the industrial value added, where China, after it's opened its economy, it started growing at an annual rate of 10.68%. But when India opened its economy, the manufacturing sector grew at only 7%. So that is the major drift when it comes to China and India. Then we also have China, which happens to be the largest exporter of manufactured goods after the European Union, and India is not even part of top 10 exporters. This is the general comparison between India as well as China. So going forward, in case India has to pull the jobs from China, and in case India has to build a manufacturing firm in India, what India has to do is to address all these concerns as given under this article. India currently has infrastructural constraint. If India is able to address it, then we would be able to address and pull back all these countries from China. A disadvantageous tax policy environment. What do we mean by it? Let's say, for example, we have the special economic zone. This special economic zone in India was established in the year 2000, and this concept originated in China, and this concept provides what is called as tax holidays to all the countries operating in China. So do we have the tax holidays in India? This was implemented only in the year 2000, and that is still not implemented in a precise way. So what is the problem here? A disadvantageous tax policy environment is what is driving countries away from India. So if India has to pull all these countries into India, they have to make sure that there are enough tax holidays and tax cut downs in India. A non-conducive regulatory environment. What do we mean by it? Let's say India is known for its license raj. A single company, in case it has to file a particular file, then there is requirement of licenses from multiple departments. India is known for corruption. India is known for red tape. India is also known for multiple departments and moving about in multiple ministries. That means there is a non-conducive regulatory environment. Then there is high cost of industrial credit, poor quality of workforce. So what is poor quality of workforce here? Skill set that is required for manufacturing might not be in India. Degrees are given importance over knowledge. Even if people are there who have enough number of skill set, are there greater number of people? What they require might be about 1,000 people or 10,000 people, but India has deficiency when it comes to the skilled labor. And what we also see in India is brain drain that is happening, where all the young students, talented ones, are leaving to United States of America. Then what we have is the rigid labor laws, followed by restrictive trade policies as well, followed by low R&D expenditure and delays and constraints in land acquisition. There is one of the important concepts in public administration and public policy, and that is what is called as the NIMBY syndrome. So what is this NIMBY syndrome? This is nothing but not in my backyard. Let's say, for example, all of us want development, but if this development is happening in my own region within my backyard, I do not let the government do that. Let me give you a simple example. We all want development. We all want electricity as well. Nuclear power also guarantees electricity to all of us. If this electricity is coming from some other region, we are ready and happy to accept it. But if this nuclear region, which requires land, is in our own backyard, our own region, we are not happy about it. So we do strikes, we pull up a lot of pressure into the government, and we also say that this is disastrous when it comes to its application. So what are we doing here? We are objecting to the developmental plans if it is in our region, but we are ready to enjoy the fruits of it if it is in some other region. And that is another major reason when it comes to the land acquisition in India. So people do not want to give lands in their own backyard, assuming that this particular project could be disastrous to them, but they are ready to enjoy the fruits of it. That is what is called as NIMBY syndrome. And in India, land acquisition is a major issue. Then we have the inability to attract large scale foreign direct investment into the manufacturing sector. These are some of the issues which India has to address in case it has to attract the foreign companies to establish their manufacturing bases in India. Then we also have to understand the role of the state governments as well. There are some states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka and Uttar Pradesh who are able to attract the manufacturing firms. That is because of two reasons. One is because of the large swathes of land prevalent in these states. The other is the policy initiatives taken by the state governments. All these states have huge lands. Because they have huge lands, they are able to accommodate the manufacturing companies to come up to these states. At the same time, they are also coming up with friendly ease of doing business so that these manufacturing companies can establish their manufacturing entities in these states. Let me give you a simple example. Tata Motors initially wanted to start in West Bengal, but because they were not able to accommodate because of the land acquisition issue, because of the policy issue, Tata Motors left West Bengal and went back to Gujarat, and they started the operations in Gujarat as well. So the key important factor, it is not only the central government which has to expand the horizons of the manufacturing, the state government's role is also very important, and their activation and their participation and their respect for the manufacturing growth is also to be taken into consideration. Then there are other states like Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, Rajasthan, Telangana and West Bengal which do have the lands, but what the governments will have to do is to find out what is unique about all these states and address the key challenges with respect to its implementation. In case all these states are able to address the challenges and come up with carefully designed policy actions, this would boost the overall investment climate in that particular state, and ultimately this will generate the jobs, this will increase the investment, and this will also promote economic growth in all these states. So what is the way forward? We have one of the initiatives called as the strategy group. This will consist of representatives from the central government, state governments and along with top industry executives. So what will this platform do? Since it has the central government, since it has the state government, this also has the top industry executives. They would be able to address the challenges. So all the three forces are present. In case there are challenges, these industry bodies will put it out to the central government, will put it out to the state government, and if they are able to address these challenges, lacuna areas and deficiency going forward, this should be addressed by the state governments and the central government, and the central government should hold the hands of the state government such that these manufacturing entities start functioning. And we also discussed about the various challenges here. If these challenges are once again addressed, we would become the manufacturing hub, says this particular article. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says NGT slams Ministry's report on Clean Air Program. This is a program to reduce particulate matter, that is pollution, by 20 to 30% in at least 102 cities by the year 2024. These 102 cities are called as the non-attainment cities. So what are these non-attainment cities? All those cities which have been consistently violating the national ambient air quality standards from the year 2011 to the year 2015 falls under this non-attainment cities. So they have been violating the pollution norms repeatedly, and pollution in these cities have increased for a considerable period of time. That is why these 102 cities are selected. So this National Clean Air Program is about reducing the pollution by the participation of the central government as well as the state government. And when it comes to the state governments, you have multiple departments as well. Why? Because it is not only the Ministry Ministry of Environment, it is not only the Central Pollution Control Board, you have multiple other ministries which are also involved as well. This includes Ministry of Road Transport, Ministry of Petroleum, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Ministry of Heavy Industry, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Ministry of Agriculture, and Ministry of Health as well. Why? Because all these ministries will get impacted and they are also increasing the pollution. So it is an attachment with respect to the pollution control. So this National Clean Air Program with the central government and state government and its ministries will make sure there is reduction of pollution by 20 to 30% in at least 102 cities. What is the present context? The National Green Tribunal has slammed the Ministry of Environment and Forest for this National Clean Air Program. According to the Ministry of Environment, it plans to reduce the air pollution in the next couple of years, and it will also have a mid-review committee which will be appointed to check how pollution can be further reduced. But NJT has a simple question. What is this question? Why is it taking so many years for the ministry to reduce the pollution? Article 21 that we currently have speaks about right to life. Right to life also includes right to clean air as well. What should people do for the couple of years that you have planned? Ideally, this should have been done in very limited amount of time, but you, the Ministry of Environment, are taking a lot of time. This means Article 21, which speaks about right to life, is getting violated. In fact, the non-attainment cities have also degraded further in terms of pollution, and standards are not met. The ministry speaks about reducing the pollutants, but what type of pollutants, you have not given any clarity. So on one side, these non-attainment cities, they degrading further and further, which you are not speaking about it. And how are you going to reduce the pollution? Which are the pollutants that you are reducing? Again, you're not speaking about it. Do we have the data? How much pollution has been reduced in the last few years? Who is monitoring the mechanism for this particular enforcement are some of the questions put across by NJT. Therefore, the target time of reduction of pollution needs to be reduced and planned steps have to be taken to sternly implement all this on the ground, says the NJT. The article further speaks about what is called as the public trust doctrine. Let's say, for example, we have the nature. Nature has gifted us some of the beautiful things that includes air, water. When we consider air and water or any natural resource for that matter, this is not restricted to just a private individual or for a community, but this is for the entire humanity and the human community as well. So when it is air or water, who has to take the responsibility? It is the elected government. So the elected government will have to make sure that everything is protected. So who has the responsibility here? It is the government, which should make sure that the air or the water is not only given to a limited number of people, but to the entire community and to the humans as well. So in this particular scenario, with respect to air, the government has the responsibility to take care of each of us because it is holding the role of a trustee. So the public trust doctrine is making sure that the government takes up the responsibility of controlling the air pollution, is what this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article says living with earth in Kerala. You don't have to go through the entire analysis. What I'll be providing you is the gist of what this issue is all about. Natural disasters have become part of Kerala these days, unfortunately. There is increasing floods, there is landslides, and what we also saw was the Kozhikode tragedy that we witnessed in Kerala very recently. What is the impact of all these tragedies? There is loss of lives, there is economic losses, there is emotional trauma, there is grief and pain, and there is also loss of lives and economic activity as well. When you look at all these natural disasters, what you also question, is it because of the aggressive development that is taking place in place of the nature? Kerala is known as the God's own country, but the very God's own countries where trees are important, where nature is important, is it being destroyed, is what this article questioning. It speaks about river pollution, it speaks about valleys filled with garbage, it also speaks about quarrying and development of the tourist hotspots in all those areas where forests have been destroyed. So what this article says is conserving natural resources and respecting the natural capital is the way forward in order for us to conserve the beauty of nature in Kerala, says this article. Rest of the things which is given is not important. The overall thing is that natural disasters are increasing. This is the impact, and we have to make sure that we safeguard the natural spirit and the natural capital is what this article all about. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into some of the preliminary practice questions. Mutual evaluation report which analyzes the implementation and effectiveness of measures to combat terrorist financing is released by, is it Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, United States of America, Financial Action Task Force, or Europol? The answer to this is Financial Action Task Force. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. It makes a mention of Europol. So Europol is the EU's law enforcement agency which helps the EU members country to fight the international crime and terrorism. Now when it comes to the mutual evaluation report, this will basically try to understand if that particular country is preventing the criminal abuse and if it is enforcing all the recommendations given by the Financial Action Task Force. Then you have the mutual countries, that is peer countries, which actually go into another country, check if this particular mechanism is implemented or not. That is what is called as the mutual evaluation process released by the Financial Action Task Force. Now let's look into the next practice question. Consider the following statements with respect to the ethics committee. It can initiate suo motu investigation into matters related to unethical conduct of a member and make recommendations. So is suo motu investigation possible? Yes. Rajya Sabha was the first among the two houses to form an ethics committee. This is also right. The ethics committee in Lok Sabha has 15 members while the Rajya Sabha has 10 members. This statement is also right. So the answer to this is 1, 2 and 3. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. Now let's look into the next practice question. Emergency Assistance Program loan aimed at supporting the Indian government to contain the spread of COVID-19 was approved by, is it World Bank, Asian Development Bank, New Development Bank, or United Nations Developmental Program? The answer to this is New Development Bank. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. Kindly remember, China is planning to come up with what is called as BRICS Innovation Base. According to this BRICS Innovation Base, it is planning to promote 5G, it is planning to promote artificial intelligence, digital economy, industry and information technology. Countries like South Africa as well as countries like BRICS have already given a yes to this particular analogy. But countries like India are skeptical about it, and in fact Huawei, which happens to be one of the companies, have been asked to move out of India as well. Why? Because India feels that all these companies, the private companies which are housed in the country of China, can also give all the important security related tools and information to the government. Why? Because the Chinese government makes these private company give all the information. That is the issue of this particular article. Now let's look into the next practice question. In the context of Indian economy, open market operations refers to purchase and sale of government securities by the RBI. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. Now let's look into the mains practice question. What does it mean to give each person his or her due? How has the meaning of giving each his due changed over a period of time? This is what we discussed about hierarchical and egalitarian society. Has regional instability, political chaos and ethnic tensions given rise to birth of terrorist organizations? Justify. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review, come up with constructive criticism. This is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.